Well, first of all, thanks for coming on. For those viewers who haven't seen the Josh Barnett video, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and anybody else. My name is Alistair. I run the Gentleman's Combatives YouTube channel. I'm an amateur fighter, professional wrestler, maker of high quality professional wrestling and martial arts gear. And I'm here to just talk about that, I suppose.
Yeah. So, first of all, what's an iron box?
So the Iron Box is my fighter nickname. And when I was training, I don't currently have it in the room with me. I was always wearing my cup because I like to protect my testicles ever since I got it. And it's actually a high density polycarbonate. However, enough of my training partners complained about that thing grinding into their back or like arm bars getting levered over it that just became my name. And it's a little bit of a Shoni Carter cup as well too. Like it's got that little bit of a bulge out. So there you go. That's where it came from.
It makes a lot of sense.
There you go.
So, shoot style, especially in the West, is not the most accessible kind of thing to get into, considering it's mostly relegated to like somebody dumping it on YouTube or like, more obscure websites. How did you initially get into shoot style or catch a sketch can?
Okay, so I had been playing rugby at university, and I was looking for something to keep me fit, like over the period of the like off season. So I was looking at the martial arts schools around me and all of that, and so I on YouTube there was a wonderful show called Human Weapon, and a Human Weapon followed Jason Chambers and I think Bill Duke, and they go around the world and they train with people in certain martial arts. And I saw the mixed martial arts episode, and in that episode there is Bas Rutten. And there were clips of Bas Rutten's pancreas fights, and then his pancreas fights showed up in the recommendations for that video back when YouTube recommendations actually used to work. And so
Hmm.
I watched Bas Rutten's pancreas fights from start to finish with his commentary. And that was it. That was me into mixed martial arts. That was me into catch wrestling. That was me into shoot style. Although that was just shoot without the style. But
Hmm.
yeah, that was my introduction to all of those. And I think it's a good one. Anytime anybody asks me, oh, I want to get into this, but I don't know what I'm watching, I tell them to sit down and watch Bas Rutten's fights. Because when he first starts, he's a kickboxer who knows how to do a guillotine, and that's it. But as he develops, he can tell you like what he's developing, what he's seeing, what he was doing wrong, and like the grappling, he becomes a very good grappler by the end of his fight career. And so you can see him develop that grappling skill, and you can learn as you go along because he starts doing very simple stuff of just getting taken down and then just guillotining and hoping for the best. And then later in his career, he's like a very good guard player. Still can't stop a takedown for his life, but there you go.
I believe you once described your MMA base as Yoshiaki Fujiwara instructionals. Uh,
Yes. Keep going,
uh,
sorry.
what are your favorite sort of old catch tricks from that sort of school that are applicable to modern submission grappling and then even pro wrestling?
Fujiwara's stuff is all great because it all links together, and I think that is very much what I was. I'm not going to say inspired by, like what that direction that I took, where everything flows into the next thing, and you're always ready there. Now it's not necessarily flowy. Like if you were to describe a Yoshiaki Fujiwara grappling style, it's very grindy. You're on top of someone and just making life uncomfortable for them. But every
Mhm.
time there's a defense to something that you're doing, you're waiting there and you know what's going to happen next. And I very much like that style of wrestling. And just the meanness, depending on who I'm rolling with. Like usually I'll take bottom position and I'll work for a sweep and whatever. But sometimes guys, you need to step it up with certain guys, or some guys, they're not approaching a training session with the right mindset. They think that you're trying to kill them. And so for those dudes, some of the meaner stuff, like his shin rides, or the Suzuki shin on neck. So sort of your normal
Yeah.
knee on belly, you've got your knee across somebody's belly and your legs out, and you're sort of pulling up on their head and providing pressure into their stomach. You just do that, except you're on their head rather than the other way around. And that's fucking awful to be under. So it usually settles you down if nothing else works.
So you've said to me before that you see pro wrestling and MMA as more or less the same thing. what would be, you described the perfect form of both shoot combat on one side and the perfect form of pro wrestling on the other, and you can't cheat and say the moat fights where they chuck each other into the moat. That's too perfect already.
Um, I think that professional wrestling and mixed martial arts are cousins that don't speak to each other.
Hmm.
You'll if you come over to well, if pro wrestlers go over to mixed martial arts, that's fucking that fake shit, bro. You know you're not a real tough guy. Mixed martial artist goes over to pro wrestling. Oh, you haven't worked real hard. You haven't paid your dues. Fuck you. Uh, Whereas you look at it, it's the same thing. The promotions have the belts. The guys who are liked by the promotions will get a push, will get easier fights. It really relies on character because as much as, people will go out on Twitter and say this boring fight with 4 takedowns in it is actually a technical masterpiece and I really enjoyed watching it, they're just lying to you. They didn't have fun at all. It's terrible. Entertainment is the premium. And as much as we try and dress up mixed martial arts as a sport and change all of our graphics so they're all fucking diagonal lines and whatever else rather than it being an entertainment medium. It's got to be fun to look at, and I think that's getting lost a little bit. But the perfect sort of shoot pro wrestling sport, it was Pancrase in my opinion. Just that 1993 to about 97 when they started getting in a lot of guys who were mixed martial arts trained, and Suzuki and Funaki were slowing down, and they didn't quite have the replacements ready. As much as Yuki Kondo and Kiyoma Kunioku are excellent fighters, they didn't have the star power that those two guys did. So that first 4 years of Pancrase, I think it was the best fight organization on the planet.
Hmm.
I think the fighters that were there were the best rounded, as well as being like if you watch a Shudo event, you've got your, 70 kilo guys out there who can do all this incredible stuff. And then just a jacked American will come in and just say no and punch him in the back of the head a bunch of times. Whereas you didn't quite have that so much in Pancrase because they guys were really big, were decently sized and in shape and could actually hang. When somebody who was just going to come in there and go, I'm big, was big with them. Um, yeah, so the perfect thing, if we could just do Pancrase again, that'd be great. But it's going to
Would
be
you
very
want to
difficult
fight?
to do in. Oh, say again?
Sorry. Would you want to
After you.
fight under those rules today?
Yes. Don't know if I'd do well, but it'd be very
Yeah.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big part of why I changed from martial arts to professional wrestling was I wanted to try and not necessarily do Pancrase again, but at least do rings or capture or something like that for an Australian audience. And I knew I needed to build up a reputation and whatever else, and so I've got to debase myself by doing chop battles in the middle of the ring until then.
Understandable. In your MMA debut, you TKO'd Matthew Pickler and then did a Ric Flair strut followed by a elbow drop. Had he done something to you to make you end his bloodline like that, or just how did that celebration come about?
It just happened. I through watching mixed martial arts and whatever else, I think like the direct YouTube rabbit hole that followed was Bas Rutten versus someone in New Japan, Shinsuke Nakamura versus Kurt Angle, and then Kurt Angle from that line goes to Kurt Angle versus Shane McMahon at King of the Ring, and then I was like, oh, I guess I'll watch some WWF. So I've been watching a lot of Ric Flair at the time, and just it hit my mind. Like I TKO'd him. I go over and I sort of wave at my brother and the other people in the crowd that had watched me, and I'm like, I got to go back over there now. I guess I will hit the Ric Flair strut. And then since then, every time I win, it was something that I do.
Yeah, it
No,
definitely
Matthew
was.
was a really pleasant guy. He was very nice to talk to. He's a 42-year-old man with no ground game that used to be in prison, and I knew that just looking at him is just like this dude is very tough. I'm gonna have to beat the shit out of him, otherwise he's not gonna give up. And I was lucky that I had Storm in there. Storm was the referee.
Mhm.
Who saw like the moment that Matty was done, he was like, "Yeah, stop now, please," because he wasn't ever going to quit.
Is always there because I understand the fighter's mentality of I didn't hear no damn bell of
Yeah,
um
I never did that. A lot of my losses are like me going. Yeah, this is about time to stop. My first one against Tennessee Duarte, I hang with him for a good while there, and I tie him up in the grappling, and then he slides over into a mounted triangle when I was too slow trying to funk roll him, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna fucking die. Okay, I'm tapping just as he starts punching. Brandon Zelinsky, I turned purple after chasing toe holds for a round. And I'm like, I cannot pick up my hands. There's no point going out. He's just gonna beat the shit out of me. Uh, Daniel Cousin just TKO'd me clean. And then my last loss was against Eddie Fernandez. And I had another fight booked in 3 weeks, and the referee for that was again Storm. And so like he and I had been messaging back and forth. It's just like, I've got a really good match set up for you. I think it'll be like a showcase for you, this guy that you're gonna fight. So make sure you get there. And I was like, yeah, I'll be fine. I was high on my own fights a little bit at the time. And then I get out there and I do pretty well, but I can feel I wasn't ready for the fight. Like I had been working a lot of night shift, been drinking too much beer, chasing too many women, and just not doing the appropriate things to be ready for a fight with a guy of that caliber. And the second round comes around and I'm doing okay. I lateral drop him. I try and Kimura him, but he's a really, well, sorry, double wrist lock him. It's a damn double wrist lock. I'm trying to double wrist lock him. He gets out and he's coming up on a double leg, and I'm like, fuck, I'm gassed. There is nothing left of me. If he gets on top clean, I'm not going to be able to defend shots. So I managed to turn his double leg into a really shit double leg of my own, and he just, I'm just like, please submit me, and trying my best to finish the takedown, but I'm like, this is a very bad takedown. You're a purple belt. You should be submitting me right now. And luckily he did. So, if you lose by TKO, 6 week suspension. You can't fight again. I've got to fight in 3 weeks. I lose by submission, no suspension. I turn up in 3 weeks and then I get my last win. So, sometimes I think you have to be smart as a fighter. And it's not quite Shannon the Cannon Rich going out there and going, I've been double legged, I'm going to tap immediately. But it's also that sort of level of decision making to maintain longevity in your career and maintain the relationships. Because I did like Storm. If I wasn't on that show, I think there were like he had a lot of dropouts that one. So like that would have hurt the show as well.
Makes sense. On the note of double wrist locks, what's your favorite application of it? Because there's a lot of variations. You can go for shoot grappling and also for pro wrestling.
The Volcan double wrist lock suplex is like the peak of things you can do with a double wrist lock. But I just like it as a positional tool. So as much as it is a submission and you're popping people's shoulders and elbows, it's just if you can get that grip on somebody, you can tie them up for minutes at a time as you just spin around and just try and sweep them over, run all the way around and jump on their back. It's a really useful little tool, especially if you don't have like a decent wrestling background. Because I'm in Australia, we don't have wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
My defense is like limited to catching a double wrist lock while I'm being taken down and working from there. But it is very useful because it's a useful tool to turn what could potentially be like a very bad wrestling engagement into a decently equal submission grappling one.
Which pro wrestlers do you draw a lot of inspiration from? And who are pro wrestlers? It could be the same people that you think other people should draw inspiration from that aren't being tapped into as much.
Just anybody from Rings Russia, because those are guys who didn't understand what professional wrestling was, got booked in rings and put on just the best matches. Volcan just turned up and just was the king of this. Just the fact that he's not in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is essentially a crime. And just you can see there's so much because it's applicable in shoot style, and traditional pro wrestling because you can change a little bit of how Volk will grab a wrist, turn it into a throw, turn it into another throw, turn it into the double wrist lock suplex. You can do that in the middle of the heat. You can do that as you shine. You can do that as all sorts of fun stuff, and it works really well. So if you're not stealing from Volcan, you absolutely should be.
So you've been plugging a lot recently, the Mat Earth Society, just a lot of pro wrestling and open mats without rings. We can obviously think about all the challenges that poses, but what are some of the best parts about structuring a match where you don't have a traditional ring? Like, what are some of the fun parts about that?
It makes people significantly more imaginative. This is something that I really ran into hard as a mixed martial artist coming across, was people do not have an imagination. They're just the way that professional wrestling is currently taught in an independent setting is very formulaic.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't find a way to plug into that formula, people won't go, I could make a slight adjustment to what I do to help showcase you. It's all on the guy who comes in with something different to fucking wrangle it to make it work. Whereas if you don't have ropes to hit, if you can't bump 40 times in a match for somebody, because you'll fucking die on on 20 mil mats on concrete, you actually have to put together something interesting. And you can devolve into just trading chops in the middle of the thing and hoping that the drunk crowd get into that, which I did a little bit. But you can also do just a lot more interesting stuff. You can plug into moves that aren't necessarily utilized importantly on their own. Like an arm drag is usually just transitional. It's just, okay, I'm going to hit my arm drag. Guy's going to go over me. He's going to come back and then I'll hit him with whatever's going to bump him. Whereas in on a mat, on thing, the guy can actually sell the arm drag, or that could just be a throw to move you into the next part of whatever you're going to do. This does not happen in traditional professional wrestling at the moment. I think it is just an imaginative desert because everybody's doing the same match.
That makes a lot of sense. What match thus far in your career is the one you're most proud of?
Um, all right. Definitely, yeah, definitely my Mad Earth match with Jordan Sampson. I really, if you had seen me after that match, just going around to Jordan and then Joel, who ran the event, is just thank you for letting me do my match because before that, I wasn't necessarily wrestling either for the crowd or for myself. It was it was wrestling to impress the people that were
Mm.
going to make the decision as to whether or not I was going to get booked the next time. And I fucking hated that. I had good matches. I enjoyed my matches with all the people, but I didn't enjoy the process of planning them or getting feedback from them or any of that because it wasn't for me. It was all for is Robbie Eagles going to watch this match and like it and recommend me for the next event?
Mm-hmm.
That isn't, I don't think that's how it should be done. You should be wrestling. One, if you're not doing it for yourself, what the fuck's the point?
Mm-hmm.
In Australia, there is no money.
Yeah.
My biggest payday was 60 Australian dollars, which
Oh,
is
yeah.
not very much. Yeah, and that was when I was getting paid. No one's doing this full time, so it's a hobby. Dress
Mm-hmm.
it up however you like. It is a hobby because you're doing this for personal enjoyment, not for money. Uh, Firstly, it should be for you because it's a hobby, and then secondly, it needs to be for the crowd because otherwise, why the fuck are they going to watch? It should not be for the people who are making decisions. They should be making the decisions based on how the crowd responded to it, not did you tick these boxes on this fucking imaginary list? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think I just saw you in one of the mat-based matches, just throw and shoot body kicks, which was quite lovely.
It, well, that's also a thing that is completely lacking in professional
Oh yeah.
wrestling. Like a guy will ask you to go out there and take a top rope bump or whatever else, and not think
Mm-hmm.
anything of it. Whereas you're just like, this is going to sting a little bit. They'll be like, oh, you son of a bitch, you're stiffing me. And no, we're both hurting each other the same amount. If anything, mine's safer for you. I know where I'm putting it,
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to actually do that with a guy was very freeing because learning to strike in a professional wrestling context fucking difficult because I'm used
Mm-hmm.
to hitting somebody when they're doing this for me. I can, all
Yeah.
right, I got to find my shot in here or around there. I got to miss the arms or whatever. If someone's doing this, I'm like,
Mhm.
this plugs into my brain and this plugs into the fighter brain. And the fighter brain thinks he's baiting me. He wants me to hit him in the neck. The counter's coming. And so I'm just like, oh, motherfucker, you better not fucking hit me. Oh, God. And it looks like shit
Mm,
because I'm second guessing myself. Quite often in my matches, I'll ask people, just cover your goddamn head. I'll hit you around it. Whatever hits you, sell that. Don't feed me anything. I actually
mhm,
want to look like you're competent and
mhm,
I'm competent. If I hit you in the guts and you go, oh, here's my neck, bro, you don't look competent. You look like
mhm,
you're feeding me the next strike, which is how we're all taught to do it at the moment.
mhm. Because some of the worst like spots I've ever seen are not to name any names, but pro wrestlers trying to imitate like boxing, where they do the weirdest little stance and exactly what you're talking about, prompting the strikes.
There's we've gone the Ouroboros is eating its own tail. Uh
Mm,
there's a point where you're trying so hard to make something look real while doing it for fake that it was
mm.
honestly easier and safer to just to do it for real.
Yeah, exactly.
And like I think with chain grappling, it's honestly way easier just to do that with each other rather than try and imagine something. Definitely with selling a submission. If I'm sitting there with this is something that I had in my last little match. I was on the pre-show for Newcastle Pro Wrestling, and luckily I got a new guy, and the new guy was listening to me because I had more experience. So I was able to
Mhm,
tell him how to do the completely wrong thing in a professional wrestling context, and he listened to me and go, "I suppose I'll do this because the more experienced guy is telling me." I just told him to hold his hands together when I had him in the double wrist lock at the end of the match. I'm like, I'm not going to hurt you, but
mhm,
I don't want you to give me this. And we worked out where the safe range of motion was in his arm, so I could put
mhm,
it in a very, very safe spot. And I was very careful to do that. But it was hold on for dear life. You don't want to lose this match, do you? And he's like, well, it's
mhm.
fake. And I go, but you don't want to lose it, do you?
Yeah.
And he's, no. So he held on, and it looks like I'm pulling a double wrist lock, popping the guy's grip for real, putting it behind his back for real while he's resisting me. We didn't shoot on each other. We didn't end up fighting. Nothing bad happened, and it looks great. Like my whole chest is popping up and whatever, and he's like got good tension and everything. And it looks like we're fighting for it because we were. We were still cooperating. He just wasn't helping, if that
Mm,
makes any sense.
yeah. I
And
think
yeah, that's how it should be sometimes. I think, yeah, it's very much lacking because it requires a different mindset, a different approach, and a lot of the people who are currently teaching professional wrestling, they didn't learn that. They learned from the previous generation of guys who were famous in America or whatever, where it was entirely cooperative all the time. Like you look at some people out there, and even on clotheslines, there's no contact. The guy's bumping underneath it. And
mm,
uh, as much as you'll get your Jim Cornettes or your whatever, and they'll go on there and they'll complain about modern professional wrestling. Uh, a lot of what we have is from them, and a lot of the reason why matches are the way they are now is because of the way that we've been taught from those guys, and that is the prevalent style. If you wish to be a successful professional wrestler, you need to engage with that style, even if it is, in my opinion, not the best professional wrestling that we could be serving an audience.
mhm. Makes
And
perfect sense.
yeah, and just I think sometimes, honestly, it's just easier to do things for real, but just understand that you're not actually fighting. And getting over that hump with quite a few of my opponents has been very difficult.
For your money, who's the best wrestler in the world right now?
Oh shit. So this would require me to watch modern professional wrestling, which I
Yeah,
don't. Pretty much, if it's not Glades, it's not their UWF style. I don't really watch very much of it.
fair enough.
Um, you there are your Daniel Bryans and guys like that. Well, Brian Danielson, who are undeniably excellent at what they do, but quite often, if they're in a traditional match with somebody else who can't do the things that they can do when they're at their best, I don't really enjoy it. Honestly, the guy who I enjoy the most is just showing off the wrestler hipster in me is Seiji Ikemoto in Glate and Hard Hit and wherever else he shows up. because that's a guy who transitions very well from a shoot style to a professional wrestling context.
Hmm.
And just uh, everything looks sharp, feels fighty all the time. Nothing he does when he goes out there, even if it is a whip to or whatever, it looks like he's trying really hard, and it looks like the other person is trying very hard for it to not happen. So that's my favorite guy, but the best. Ugh.
Well, it's a subjective. It's art. It's subjective. So favorite's what I'm looking for.
Well, there you go. Seisuke Ikemoto.
Hmm. Last question I have for you. What's the coolest piece of wrestling gear you've made?
Oh, dear, oh dear. Quite a lot has run around and just looks excellent. I just often when I finish making something, I'm like, "Ah, you bastard! I've made this for you, and now I've got to send it off." And I think probably the set of knee pads and kick pads I made for Akira. So Akira just recently got announced for Bloodsport against Matt Mikowski. That's very exciting. It sent
Hmm.
me a message. It took us ages just to organize this because I'd take too long to reply to him, and then he'd take too long to send me his measurements, and then eventually I was just like, I'm just making them to this size. If they don't fit, they don't fit, and that's your fault. And they're really cool. They're like they're plain black, but they're just every different material I could find that was black, just strips and stripes in a sort of randomized pattern on a pair of knee pads and kick pads. I'm like, don't wear these for death matches. Third match he wears them in is is on Big Japan. Light tubes going everywhere, and now the knee pads are gone and ruined. But that is honestly the coolest thing I've made.
That is lovely. Well, thank you so much for coming on with me. Hopefully that was enjoyable to answer the questions. It's not as if I have that big of an audience. Is there anything you want to plug coming up?
Not really. Just if you want to watch the Gentleman's Combatives YouTube channel, you can see me lose my mind over old school shoot matches. If you're a wrestler or a martial artist, I make fine quality professional wrestling and mixed martial arts gear. Actually sold some Valley Tudo shorts to a gym, but for example, here are a pair. So I can do all sorts of fancy shit for you. If you just send me a message on the old Instagram at GCC Wrestling Gear. So there you go. That's the plug.
All right. Thank you very much.